right, guys. I apologize for the delay. I had a couple technical issues come up here. But yeah, welcome to Maximum Trial. I've been wanting to post this conversation for a while now, but things kept coming up and distractions kept coming up. So I'm gonna just add this here.
Let's try this again.
Let me know if you guys can hear this as it's playing. If I mute myself on here.
Confirming the idea.
Yes, what I don't understand is like, okay, let's say that.
You can still hear it? Okay, let me see if.
Evolution doesn't explain language. No, I'm not mad. I'm just.
I think I'm just replying to some comments while I wait for people to come in. So let's just see. Let's go.
No, it is TikTok. Why would you not believe all the other contexts in which evolution does have an incredible amount of evidence for? Is he coming on? What's going on? I'll try to share it with him again here. Okay, great.
The real video should start in a couple of minutes. I was just waiting for both my brother and
David. I know you're not a biologist, but
there's a reason to come in.
Is there anything you want to say about evolution?
Like what?
So Emma said, because we as a species don't bring homeostasis to the planet. I'm not sure what that means though. Like, I mean, do you agree that the theory of evolution is as well founded as, something like gravity?
So the fact that when we call something a theory, it means that it's a kind of explanation for which there has been many different kinds of observations confirming the idea in very different kinds of places, all working together. And so there are many ideas that are not called theories that have that kind of thing, but you sort of have to cross a certain threshold before you call it a theory. So theories are the most important thing. To say something like a theory doesn't have any evidence in its support really means that you don't have a sense of what a theory is.
Okay, so voice of reason. How do you like me to address you? Yeah. So I would say this is more of a conversation than a debate, but Luke. Yeah, I'll call you Luke. So maybe you can start this off by saying what it is that you believe, because they're saying they can't hear you. Why can't they hear you? I think TikTok has been having issues. I know. Here. And then come back on. Sure.
By the way, just for a heads up,
he's gonna try to come back on. I don't know what's going on with TikTok today.
You're gonna see Voice of Reason literally defeat himself in this conversation.
Let's try if this works.
I hope you guys enjoy.
All right, can you guys hear him now?
Hello. Anyone? What's going on today?
Let us know in the audience if you can.
Good now. That's good.
Okay, now they can hear you. Perfect. So,
wait, before we do that, you got my name. I'm Luke. I got to get your old names.
So I go by Cease.
Cease. Okay.
And My brother here, he
Goes
goes
by
by Dave.
C's too.
You can call him David.
All right, David. All right,
David.
David.
So my understanding of your perspective, and please correct me if I'm misrepresenting your views here. You are a young Earth creationist, am I right?
Yeah, it's much crazier than that.
Okay, young. So how about you provide us with some of what it is that you believe about current
Okay.
science?
Yeah.
If I'm remembering correctly, you reject the Big Bang theory, evolution.
Yeah, I'm a serial Big Bang denier. I didn't know that was a term, but thanks to Eric Lerner, now we know it is. Okay, yeah, I'll give you my whole thing. So, my belief system is complicated and nuanced, and there's basically four components that make up my belief system. I'm not dogmatic. I know what is proof. I know what is evidentially supported. I'm pretty good at knowing where bias kicks in. But basically, in this four-part belief system, or four parts that make up my belief system, number one, I think that this secular scientific narrative is a religion, a dogmatic religion. It's pseudoscience, misinformation. It sucks and needs to be gotten rid of as soon as possible. Not that I'm biased, and I'm sure that's a good way to start this to trigger everybody. Number two, I think that, and these can be all separate beliefs. They don't have to. They do glom together like how you believe planets formed, but they don't have to be. I can argue each one of them independently. Number two, I think the science is pointing to us being in an information-based reality. So I'm an idealist. And I think that the science they believed in 250 years ago with the Age of Enlightenment was largely biased and intended to unravel the predominant belief system of the biblical narrative. Guys like Lyell, Huxley, they were, by their own words, to remove Moses from the sciences. This is what they were actually intended to do. Religious trauma. They wanted away from the Catholic oppressive system. I get that. So basically, that was 250 years ago, and we've learned a lot in 250 years. And rather than progress and actually go where the data is pointing us, we've spent 250 years, we haven't, the scientific enterprise, trying to prove their theory at all costs. It's been a medical disaster, a political disaster, a scientific disaster. So the good news is, with the advent of the internet, the gatekeepers and the arbiters of truth, that's falling apart, and real intelligent people are able to make deductions, which is why we're finding things like the universe isn't locally real, potentially we're in an information-based reality, etc. So belief number one is that the current model sucks. Belief number two is that the science is pointing to an information-based reality. Belief number three, when you start to look at okay, we're an information-based reality. Who created this reality? I lean something like a simulation. We can get to that later. Who's the programmer? Where's the computer? How did this happen? I think without any question, the only viable candidate is Yahweh Jehovah, the God of the Bible. So I believe in the validity of the Bible, historical support, philosophic support, theologic support, whatever. So if we go, I don't trust the system, I think science is pointing this way, what does it mean? Then we get into biblical creation, which is where I'm a young earth creationist, but that's not the point of this, is to convince the world that it's 7,000 years old. I think there's evidence in favor of it and evidence against it. And at the end of the day, we decide these things on your presuppositions. Last thing, I'm a Christian, and I think the prophecies of Yeshua Jesus, who was a real historical figure, slants the needle to the Bible being possibly constructed by man into a supernatural construct. So I can talk about any or all four of those. I think the point of tonight is my issues with the secular system. But as far as my worldview and what I think science is actually saying, I'm super down to get into that as well.
Yeah, I would say before David jumps in here, I would definitely love to have the theological discussion with you. Why it is that I ultimately think that the religious perspective fails to explain anything of what we see in reality. But yeah, for the sake of this conversation, I'm more interested in seeing kind of the way that you view science versus the way that I think how my brother understands it here. David, is there anything that you want to respond to what was just said, or should we get into specifics about where he disagrees with the science?
Well, I would say the value is in the details, right?
Right.
So, in terms of criticizing science today, I would say that, well, I'm first of all, I'm a critic of all sorts of things within science, but science has advanced to a point where we are getting at the way things are at some level, and the progress is impressive.
And so, what do you think of this view that modern science is like a religion? It's functioning like a religion.
Me or David?
David, David.
Well, I mean, that's a huge question. So again, if it's true, if what I said before is true, then obviously, I think science is a great tool for getting at the way things are, and we are doing a tremendous job at a certain level. That doesn't mean there aren't problems with science. In particular, it's important to recognize that science is done by people, and people have all sorts of biases. I'm complaining about this all the time. Right. And so one of the things that I see in my specific area of research is that there are all sorts of pressures, all sorts of biases that operate that make it difficult for good ideas to emerge, right? So the scientific process has to work through all of that because you're dealing with people, and that takes time. So you'll see that even though some good ideas are already well supported by the data, they don't emerge immediately because they have to be accepted by people who have biases. So there are all sorts of interesting sociological issues there, but that doesn't mean that science doesn't progress, however slowly.
So maybe let's get into the details now. Luke, what is your contentions, for example, with the Big Bang Theory?
Yeah, I'll cover the Big Bang. Just to dovetail real quick, kind of close up David's point. I think that's a big, he being in science, that he can observe that. It's super. So there's kind of two versions of science. There's actual academic, scholarly, boots on the ground science, and then there's kind of pop science. And the actual scientists struggle a little bit with the pop science interpretation because it's very clickbaity. They run with things, they give a version. And so for David to have experienced that isn't a surprise, because I call it the scientific enterprise. When you look at like how science works, it's first off, there has to be money. Where does the money come from? You got to get money from somewhere. Who's funding you? Whatever. And then if you're trying to be funded, what's the net gain? Well, right now, obviously, we have a lot of pharmaceutical gain. There's some there's a technologic gain, whatever. But where does the money come from to really look into the nature of reality? And then you start to figure out, if you find something out idealist or something out that's controversial and you go to publish it, and now you're kind of held accountable by these peers and mocked, etc., how much science is actually able to be done in any kind of progressive way. And I would say that the paper that just came out from Nature, that was published in Nature, showing the decline of disruptive science, shows kind of what David's saying, which is we have a kind of a stalemate. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, David, but we have an inability to progress at the rate of maybe scientific progression that could be there because of all of this political biases, I would say even agendas. So I think that's important. I'm glad to know that he can identify that. I'm curious to see how far down that rabbit hole he's willing to go with me. But as far as the Big Bang, I'll try and make it quick. I know I'm a rambler, and if you guys want to interrupt me at any time, please do. I talk when I talk.
The only thing I want to say to that is my assumption is that what you're going to consider reasonable science and what I think David is going to consider where the evidence is going to be vastly different. But let's see if that's the case. So, yeah, what is your view on the Big Bang?
Okay, so the Big Bang is a new idea. As recently as Albert Einstein was an adherent to the steady state model. So was Fred Hoyle. I'm a big fan of Fred Hoyle. I'm much more in the thinking of a Fred Hoyle than I would be, whatever, somebody like a Neil deGrasse Tyson or Michio Kaku, whatever. The Big Bang, when the idea was introduced, was ludicrous. Actually, when Hoyle coined the term, he coined the term as a joke because he said the idea of everything being infinitely packed into a, speck, infinitely dense, whatever, singularity expansion is a joke. Was it a Big Bang? So it was a joke initially in the scientific community, and logically it was a joke. And my first issue with the Big Bang is it makes no logical sense, and my second issue is that the data doesn't support it. And I think if you're being intellectually honest, it would be okay to start questioning something like the Big Bang. What do I mean by that? Hopefully you guys know, I mean, he's a physicist, so he probably knows this pretty well, but he's going to try to explain to me the origin of matter and what caused the Big Bang. He's going to say, we don't know. Singularity, whatever. Entirely a belief system. Whatever you want to say about the Big Bang, it's going to come down entirely to faith because nobody has any idea. And not only do we have no idea, it violates the very laws of physics. So to me, a scientific theory, and I'm with Fred Hoyle on this, that it fundamentally violates the laws of physics egregiously and in multiple instances should be looked at very critically. And it was at the beginning. But then you have pop science, guys like Einstein, you have, decades pass, and we kind of go, oh, well, you know what? Science knows that. They figured that shit out. They figured it out. It's fine. The problem is, the more data they find, the less fine the theory is, including, and most recently, an absolute table upending physical evidence of actual photographic evidence, if you can call it that, of fully formed, massive, fully symmetric galaxies at the beginning of what should be the Big Bang. To me, it's an illogical theory supported only by CMBR. I mean, maybe you want to say the elements. I'm curious if he says that. You have you have inflation at the beginning, which nobody can account for. We have the laws of physics say that matter isn't formed. It was created. Matter doesn't come out of nothing. There's always something that acts on it. So we punt on the first law. And the second law with entropy, things become disorganized over time. As they found out the universe is expanding, I have no problem with the universe expanding. By the way, I'm not a flat earther. I believe space is real. I'm a globe earther. Whole other conversation. But the universe is expanding. Great. You would expect, based on the laws of physics, that the acceleration is neutral or slowing down. What do they find? It's speeding up. It's speeding up. It's accelerating. That doesn't make any sense. So you have a violation of the first law, violation of the second law, and it's speeding up. Well, this is a problem. What do? Dark energy. Can you measure it? Nope. It's just happening. So so far, the very creation of it defies logic and defies physics. Nobody can explain it. The acceleration of it defies logic, defies physics. Nobody can explain it. And rather than going, maybe our theory sucks, they go, shit, let's just make things up. Dark energy, whatever. And then now they actually get photographed evidence of what they thought that they had it nailed down, 13.8 billion years. They thought with the Hubble telescope, 9 billion years. Disorganized, we see the stellar evolution, we see the, evolution of planets, whatever, solar systems. Well, now they're not only fully evolved, they're massive, which is exactly the opposite of what they expected. So I guess the question is, why in the hell would anybody believe in this theory? What would so compel someone to hold on to this theory that makes no sense, defies laws of physics, and everything we find is contradicting it?
Okay, let's see what David has to say to these claims.
Okay, so Luke, when I said that we should have a conversation based on specifics, that's what we should do because that's a productive thing to do. Right. So you've said so many things about so many different kinds of things that it's hard, and all of this is basically confused. So it's very hard to address issues. When you throw so much stuff at people, you're basically creating noise. So let's be specific. You've talked about
let's start at the very beginning.
Different laws of physics, right? Claiming that the Big Bang is illogical, so that's a philosophical notion, then claiming that it violates physical laws, okay? And then you talked about various
I'm not claiming
different
it
physical laws. You talked about the steady state theory,
right?
Okay, and the steady state theory, and why were people talking about the state? Why was that a preferred model? Why was it abandoned? Let's be specific. So let's talk about some specific evidence about that forced people or that moved people in the direction of the Big Bang model, right? So you mentioned Fred Hoyle, okay? Fred Hoyle had a reasonable idea about how the universe would be, and everybody at that time shared that idea.
Right.
Okay, because of the nature of the theory of general relativity and the way space and time are treated in that theory. So it makes sense not to produce asymmetries, because general relativity and all of theories in physics don't have a certain kind of asymmetry which the Big Bang would generate. Okay, so it's naturally.
Will you say that last part again? Say the last line again.
So when you look at all all the different theories of physics, they have a certain kind of symmetry. Things are treated, things seem to be the same when you're looking at time specifically. Things in the past and things in the future should kind of be the same. That's a notion of symmetry, and physics has this everywhere. And so the steady state model has this feature in it, and so it was a natural model to prefer. And many people preferred it over the Big Bang. And the Big Bang was accepted because of the evidence. People accepted it kicking and screaming. They hated this idea because it violated these symmetries. And Fred Hoyle never gave this up, and he was laughed at because of this. He was kind of thought he was a crazy person. He made great contributions. But let's be specific about why these things existed and how the paradigm changed. The paradigm changed because the evidence forced people. So let's talk about evidence. So, right, the first evidence for the Big Bang is Hubble's law.
Right.
Okay. So how do we interpret this? How do we interpret Hubble's law?
I thought recently that Hubble's law, there was an issue with that as well, but maybe you can define it for me. Go ahead. I'll look it up too.
Well, Hubble's law, in the details of Hubble's law, you can find whether the expansion rate is changing. Okay. So you said some things that I actually agree with. So, for example, you said something about the current dark matter paradigm, that even if this went away, that wouldn't change the fact that the Big Bang is still a valid idea. But there are assumptions that perhaps we need to reconsider. So the idea that the universe is everywhere the same on the largest scales. This seems like a good assumption. It seems like a good assumption philosophically, but this was never verified, and perhaps it's wrong. And one of the problems is that it's very hard in general relativity to solve the equations and understand what the universe is like if you don't make this assumption. These are very difficult equations to solve, and so if you don't have that assumption, then you need very complicated computer simulations to solve this. And so I think there's a psychological factor here. People convinced themselves that this was a good idea. And perhaps this fails, and this is maybe getting at the Hubble tension that we see today. But this is not evidence against the Big Bang. Neither is the evidence of these so-called problems with these images of these galaxies that people don't fully understand from the James Webb Space Telescope. So the evidence for the Big Bang is the evidence for the universe having evolved from a very particular state in the past to a different state in the future comes from looking at the universe at large and seeing the redshift of these galaxies, seeing Hubble's law. So this is a fundamental object that you need to understand if you want to question the Big Bang, because you need to reinterpret all this data in a completely different way.
Okay. So my first response to that is, if I'm correct, Hubble's law was basically the universe is expanding. We see the redshift, and we can project that it's expanding at a steady rate. So wasn't the acceleration of the objects away from each other a violation of Hubble's law? Isn't that into question now?
Okay, so I'm not really sure what you mean by the acceleration of the objects. Hubble's law gives you the speed as a function of distance, although that's not really the correct way of thinking about this. But in his time, it was this was thought about as the speed of galaxies as a function of distance, and so he plotted this, and he got a roughly linear line. If the line is really linear, then it means the rate of expansion is not changing.
Right,
now,
but the expansion is accelerating, so it's wrong. He was wrong.
Well, Hubble had nothing to say about whether the expansion was accelerating, so I'm not sure why you're invoking Hubble in this regard.
Well, you mentioned Hubble's law as though it was some sort of predictive power or something that we had got.
It's extremely powerful, yes, but it's
except for it's wrong. because he projected that it was going at a steady rate and it's accelerating. The
Hubble
expansion is
never
accelerating.
projected anything. He never even commented on. He didn't trust theory, and he didn't make any. He never really. It's not even clear that he accepted that the universe that the data should be interpreted in the way we interpreted it. Okay, it's not even clear what his views were. So, but who cares about that?
Oh, I care
what matters
because
is.
you mentioned it as like something that maybe I didn't understand, or something that in favor of your belief, and I'm telling you that my understanding of Hubble's law, and we can pull up some peer-reviewed papers,
Okay,
is that
so Hubble's law says that the speed of distant galaxies is greater with distance. So you look at different galaxies that are further away, and their speeds are greater in completely random directions in the sky. So please explain that data to me.
Okay, so I'm going to read, and you can correct me where this author is wrong. This is Roland. This is Roland D. Hubble's Failed Law by J. Phys Astron. It says Hubble's law, the statement the galaxies are moving away from Earth at velocities proportional with their distance, is considered the ultimate defining evidence supporting the hypothesis that the universe may be expanding. Because of false assumptions, faulty reasoning, and data that may be contrived, Hubble's law is fatally flawed. Edwin Hubble made the unwarranted assumption that nebula are accelerating away from each other, then found the mathematics to prove his foregone conclusion.
Okay, but so this is already having nothing to do with what we're talking about. So acceleration is not something that emerges from this data. And it's irrelevant for the Big Bang. Whether the universe the question is whether there's expansion here. We don't really care about whether the expansion rate is changing. That's sort of a subtle point on the idea of the Big Bang, of the expansion of the universe. You agree with that?
No. You don't care if the expansion is accelerating? You have no problems with that?
But you agree that the issue here is whether the universe is expanding or not. That's fundamentally what the Big Bang model is about, is it not?
Okay. I think that's one of the cover stories for what they say the Big Bang is, and this goes back a little bit to the discussion I was having
forget
earlier.
about what other people say. Let's look at the data, right? So if you don't agree with how to interpret this data, you have to give me your interpretation of this data, right? Because this is what we have to do. If we don't like the data, then we have to find a way of understanding this data differently.
Okay. So let me be very clear on my point related to the data of the expanding universe. I certainly don't argue that the universe is expanding. I'm not going to get into the biblical side of this, but the Bible says over and over that God stretches out the heavens. You could make an argument, if you were to have predictive power, you would have expected the universe to be expanding based on what Scripture says. I know that's a side discussion. I don't have a problem with the universe expanding. I think that the universe is, not me, a lot of people who are kind of adhere to logic would say that the expansion accelerating creates a problem because it wasn't predicted by the Big Bang, and there's no way to explain this out of the model other than to invoke what I would say is a rescuing device of dark energy that hasn't been observed. So this is what I'm saying. It's like, I guess definition is everything. If we're saying the Big Bang is only talking about an expanding universe, then yeah, the Big Bang's fine. As far as the creation of matter, how the elements come into play, how we got here, this whole kind of bigger idea, and if the data matches the predictive power, this is what I was saying. This is what I would say is lacking, and the fact that it's expanding at an accelerating rate is like, again, why you continue to hold on to the theory. I mean, you haven't actually said why, but I'm wondering why things like this don't make you go, maybe the theory's wrong. You don't see an accelerating expansion as a problem based on the laws of physics as we understand them.
Okay, so again, you threw at me a bunch of unrelated things. I'm trying to sort of hone in on a very specific a set of ideas. And you threw a bunch of things to me. What I'm trying to say to you is that there's no need to talk about acceleration. What I'm convinced of is that you don't understand what expansion means, and you don't understand what kind of data would point to expansion. Acceleration of expansion is a more subtle thing on expansion, but it's not the thing that we should be focusing on, right?
Okay,
So when we talk, sorry, go ahead.
I want to make something really clear. I understand what expansion means. I understand what expanding particles, the solar systems, the planets, everything moving away from each other. Just I know, because I don't believe what you do. You immediately think that I can't grasp major concepts, but an expanding universe, I just want to be very clear. I understand.
Okay, but planets don't expand away from each other. Most
So,
galaxies, many
galaxies, whatever.
galaxies are not moving away from each other. They're moving towards each other.
Okay.
So when you say that I understand something and that galaxies and planets are moving away from each other, it's a strange statement because galaxies are moving. There are plenty of galaxies that are moving toward each other. Planets aren't moving away from each other, right?
Okay.
The solar system isn't expanding.
Scalability, galaxies, then we'll call it. Whatever, we're all, the idea being that in 100 trillion years, there's going to be nothing because we're going to all separate from each other so far away, or just the galaxies, whatever. It's expanding. I'm just saying, I get that idea. Whatever, some are coming towards us, some are going
But
away from us, whatever.
This is why we have to be specific. This is why I say let's look at Hubble's law and let's try to understand what it's telling us. What I'm telling you is that it's telling us something very specific, and it's powerful. And we can't get away from that. You start to throw in planets, the second law of thermodynamics. It's got nothing. Acceleration, people who have ideas that are who knows what. None of this has anything to do with anything. What we need to do is imagine that we took this data. Imagine that we're Hubble, right? And we look at this data and we have to try to understand what it means. What is it telling us? Is the data faulty? Because people can do these measurements now, right? We can do these measurements. What is the redshift telling us? What does it mean for the velocity of a distant galaxy to have the same redshift as the distant galaxy in the opposite direction, in a completely different direction? What does that mean? How do we explain that thing? And what I'm saying to you is that this is a very difficult thing to explain. And so when you look at Einstein's theory of relativity, which seems to be the modern paradigm for gravity, and you see that there's a natural way to fit that data into that theory, you have a powerful combination between observation and theory. What you're doing is not honing in, not focusing on this data and realizing how powerful it is. You're just going in random direction, quoting people, doing this, looking at other physical ideas, and we can't have a conversation like that. We're not going to get at bedrock and understand whether there are problems with theories in that way.
Again, let me just jump in for a second. Could you explain to us what is meant by the expansion so that maybe we can understand? And also, the one claim that was made earlier was by Luke is that the Big Bang violates the laws of logic and the laws of the universe.
Physics.
The laws of physics. Could you, Luke, tell me which laws it's violating? Because I want to hear.
Yeah, I will. Okay, so I hope we can have a more productive conversation than you, like, in a very boring way, explaining how Hubble's law explains that the universe is expanding. I think we have a bigger discussion to have than that, and if it devolves into that semantic, I don't know. I don't think anybody's going to enjoy it. The expanding universe. The Big Bang model is that everything was compacted into a small area, period on the size of a paper, hot, dense ball. Who cares? It's monopoly money. It doesn't matter. And that
but
something
this is
costs.
wrong. This is wrong right off the bat.
Okay, tell me what it actually says.
Does not say that anything specific about the nature of space. Okay, up until you can handle the equations. Right. So, what was space like at the beginning of the universe, right before you can no longer follow the equations? We don't really know. Space could be infinite.
Okay, so you don't think that everything was compacted into a hot, infinitely dense, hot?
It's irrelevant what I think. What I'm saying to you is that you have a theory, you have to follow the theory, and the theory tells you certain things. So if you want to then say that the theory is illogical, you have to show me where you have to first understand the theory.
I will, and I'll try not to do it too fast where you can keep up. Before I explain what I mean by illogical, I would like you to tell me, you said it doesn't matter what I believe. Do you believe that everything in the universe was compacted into a hot, dense area, whatever the size was?
According to the theory, right? The theory tells you something about the state of matter early in the universe. Yes, it was in a compact state. It was hot. This is not the same thing as understanding what space was like.
When the hell did I say anything about what space is like? I told you what you're telling me, and you said I was wrong.
You said the area was compact of the entire
Oh,
universe.
right. Okay. I'll try to. Okay.
So
Everything in the
real quick,
universe was tightly compacted into a very small, hot, dense area, and everything rapidly expanded out initially because of inflation, much faster
We
than the
don't know
laws would
what the
require.
universe was like at that point. Part
Okay.
of the universe was in this state. Yes.
Okay. Whatever. So,
so let me just jump in for a second because I think this is a key point here, is that the Big Bang is not referencing the origin of reality. It's
right.
talking about the expansion of the observable universe. So I think that sometimes people are projecting other notions that don't actually relate to what's actually being said. The one thing that I am really curious about is you said that the theory violates
Right. I'm going
physical
to get to
laws.
those.
Yeah, please.
Your brother said I didn't understand what expansion is. You asked me to define what
Sure, sure,
expansion is.
sure.
I'm telling you what expansion is. First off, I think it's an all fairy tale, so it doesn't matter to me. I'm telling you what you guys believe. You guys believe that everything in the universe, everything in my office, my coffee cups, the moon, the earth, my cars, everything that makes up everything was smashed into something the size I could fit in my hand. He's got the whole universe in his hand. I got it in my hand. And then, for whatever reason, nobody knows because who cares? You don't have to answer these questions. There was a rapid expansion initially with inflation, violates all law. But like you said, it doesn't matter. I won't even say that point. Inflation makes sense, whatever. And then from then on, we've seen because of the laws of what would it be called, inverse square law or whatever. You have that momentum continuing off into eternity. So obviously things smash together and gravity goes. You get a bigger star and you get a star cluster, etc. But largely everything is moving out away from this initial expansion. Is that a good definition?
No. So what you just described is things moving away from certain points in space. Right? So there's a point in space and things are moving away from that.
You think that's different than what I just said?
That's what I'm taking from what you said. Is that your picture?
I'm trying to keep this as elementary as possible. Everything was compacted into a very small area, which localized
I
would be an
understood
area,
that part.
and it expanded out from there.
My
It's
point,
expanding out.
I'm sorry, I just want to point out, this is a fundamental point. It's crucial to understand whether we're talking about things moving away from some point in space or not, because this is fundamental to the theory.
Okay.
Okay, so your picture seems to suggest that. And that's not the way the theory works.
Okay. Would you
Things are not
care to tell me
moving
how the
away
theory
in
works?
space.
Okay. Can you maybe explain the theory and then I'll.
So that's why I said that the Hubble's law, when Hubble made the data and made Hubble's plot, and made the plot of velocity versus distance, it's not really velocity because he didn't understand he didn't know how to interpret this data, and he thought that this meant things moving in space. The way to interpret this is that space itself is expanding. And so an analogy that might be useful is a balloon, right? We always appeal to this balloon analogy to give you a sense that the surface of the balloon, when you blow up the balloon, if you put dots on the balloon, you glue pennies to the balloon, and you blow the balloon up, that represents the expansion of space. It does a pretty good job. It's a two-dimensional model of the three-dimensional space of the universe. But it's telling you that these pennies are not moving in space because they're glued to space. They're fixed on the balloon. Okay? So this is important because it's telling you it's a good analogy to give you a sense of what the theory is about, because the theory is a very abstract kind of thing.
That sounds very complicated. So in this balloon analogy, at one point was the balloon smaller and more dense?
If we're talking about the visible part of the universe, yes.
And then did everything expand
the balloon
out?
as being smaller and smaller, yes. And then the space, as you blow up the balloon, the space between the pennies gets larger and larger.
Okay. So I don't disagree. I don't think it's. I would figure out maybe if it even. I think you're having a hard time even explaining what it is. I think it's a complicated belief system. We all have an origins model. That's fine. I'm fine. It's expanding, but not together, but also away. Whatever. I don't care. Fine. Here's why it's illogical. Why does it matter?
I gotta jump in. I gotta jump in here because I think the problem here is that to it's one thing. Look, I'm all for criticizing any idea, whether it's in a scientific context, a religious context, a political context.
Right.
No idea should be kept from scrutiny.
Love that
Like
you
I
said
completely
that.
agree with
Very
you
good.
there. The problem is that it seems like there may be certain misconceptions here about what the science is actually suggesting. And so what you may be criticizing is not the actual science. So when you say that, well, the Big Bang is just a fairy tale, like, well, okay, well then how are you understanding the Big Bang theory? It seems like there may be some confusion here, and when it's brought to your attention, the response shouldn't be, well, I don't care. It should be, okay, well, let me try to clear up maybe where is it that I may be misunderstanding what's being said here, so that if I am going to attack the theory, I can, it's not going to be based on some straw man. It's going to be based on the actuality of what the theory is suggesting. So I think one way to help with this is, again, you mentioned the laws it's violating. Could you go into detail as to which
Yes,
laws?
I'm not gonna let you guys go on this. I don't know who you normally have on here. You could like you bully them and like not
No, I'm
that
not
you're
trying to
bullying
bully
me.
you. We're
No,
just
no. What I mean is like you just don't understand. What I'm telling you is that the point that I'm arguing is the way you believe it, and it's irrelevant to the actual context of the argument that we're having. The points that I'm making is where did matter come from, which we're not going to address. Why is the expansion accelerating? And why, these are my main points that I said at the beginning, why did they predict that you would find primordial, beginning points of galaxies, small galaxies, and instead they find fully formed, fully mature, massive galaxies? Those are the only 3 points that I brought up. As far as how you want to describe that it's expanding, I don't care. I think it's expanding too. My point is, my issue isn't with the way if it's a balloon.
Oh, you still there? Did you get a call?
My phone just occasionally is like, you
Oh,
update all
no
your
worries.
emails. It doesn't matter. So I'm just saying that as far as this conversation goes, we have so many more exciting things to talk about. Whatever you want, how the universe is expanding, I'm okay with that. The way, the wind, the pennies, that doesn't matter to me. That's not the issue with it. The issue is the expansion is accelerating, and in this model, we don't account for where it staggers my mind that you all don't find a problem with this model not addressing where everything in reality came from, and you just have to punt on it. And I understand why you have to punt on it. It doesn't, like, I guess let me say it this way. If you want to believe that it happened through natural causes, some sort of natural thing, that is illogical, because everything we know, everything that's created has a creation, something that would create it. And I'm telling you, whether you believe me or not, and then I'll let you go. But this is the biggest. This is my first point about it being illogical. The more likely scenario, adhering to Occam's razor, is something outside of this universe caused this universe to be. That's the more logical deduction. And to say that it just happened, or I guess I'm curious to see what you guys actually say about where all the matter comes from, if you think it matters, or if it's logical that it just all happened.
Sure. So, David, go ahead first, and then I'll also respond to what was just said, because I think there's some issues here. But maybe you can.
Okay, so I think we've actually made progress. So you started this conversation by attacking the the Big Bang theory, starting with Hubble and Einstein, and you mentioned Fred Hoyle, but you actually then agreed with me essentially that the Hubble law is evidence for expansion, and that you agree that and you have no problem with expansion. So I think this is actually important because
That's not what was said. I actually specifically said that I think there's issues with Hubble's law and his predictions don't match the actual evidence. I said it's expanding. I agree with redshift and a couple other pieces. I agree that it's expanding. I never agreed that Hubble proved it. And I mean, you think that you're making progress, but
I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean by
changed.
Hubble. The Hubble, if it's expanding, you agree that it's expanding because there's evidence for expansion.
Right.
So what's the evidence for expansion? It's Hubble's
Redshift.
law. Okay, Hubble's law, right?
Okay.
You're talking about much more detailed Hubble's data of that kind. So you're agreeing that Hubble's data is the reason why expansion is a good theory.
Hubble's data, yes. I pushed back on
Okay.
Hubble's law, but I agree with the data, yeah.
Hubble's data, Hubble's law, it's the same thing. I'm not sure. It's just a nomenclature.
Okay.
It's the same thing. Just referring to his data.
So let me just jump in for a second to provide. Oh, actually, no, David, keep going because I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I don't think you were done yet.
No. But this is important. You say that you get bored. Right? So first of all, the first point is we made some progress. We both agreed that if we have to explain certain data, that data is best explained in terms of expansion, and that's all I wanted to get at. Yeah, you're saying that it's boring to focus on little things like this, but the only way you can make sweeping statements about things is if you don't understand data, and so it's a problem. We have to focus on data.
So okay, so let me just jump in for a second because I want to address this. When you say that everything has a creator, now we want to go into like the theological discussion. Like I said, I think it's better, for the sake of this discussion, to stay away from that for the most part. But I just want to say this: I can posit a metaphysical necessity to nature the same way that a theist would to God. For me, it doesn't make any sense to talk about existence outside of space and time, or this assumption of creation, that everything we see was created. Again, we have an empirical basis to talk about why paintings were created, why cars were created, why houses were created. We don't have an empirical basis for that when it comes to nature itself. You're comparing organic matter to artificial things, and I think that there is a clear distinction. You're sort of smuggling in your assumption already in the conclusion there. Like, I don't think there's any reason to assume that the universe was created or that nature itself was created. These are things that are on the theist to prove it and or to provide evidence for. And the Big Bang, again, it's not talking about the origin of reality. So when you say this isn't a problem for the Big Bang, like we can say we don't know how reality came to be, and saying, well, God did it, and saying it's more logical. To me, it's just saying it's like out of the gaps. It's like saying we don't have an explanation, so let's just make up one. And because it seems to work with our intuitions, we're going to call it more logical.
Okay, let me interrupt you real quick. I never said because it doesn't. There's only one way to do it that God would do it. I never said that.
Sure, no,
And I'm not. I mean, I don't push for the idea that we should teach that God did it.
Right.
But you brought up a very important point: the belief that a God created this universe and the belief that the universe created itself are both entirely conjecture and entirely belief systems based on your presuppositions. You said you don't think there's any need to. I'll give you a thought experiment here at some point in this debate to show you why it's every bit more logical to believe that something was responsible for this. I'm not telling you it was God of the Bible. I'm saying to omit that as a possibility
No.
and then invoke these other things is absolutely a belief system as well.
I don't omit anything from a possibility, but what I would say is that those are not the only two options. So again, in saying it's either God who created the universe or the universe created itself, you're already assuming creation as a thing in the conversation. And I'm saying that there are other possible approaches that one can take philosophically that don't require the idea of creation. And for me, when somebody says, forget God, let's say whatever else would be, to say that it was something outside of space and time, to me, linguistically, doesn't hold any meaning. That I think we understand existence within a context of space and time. And so to say outside of space and time is not something that I comprehend. I actually want to ask my David if what I'm saying makes sense, because I've heard physicists talk about outside of space and time in certain contexts, and I never know what is meant by that. David, maybe you can explain to me if there is some context in which that would make sense, because I don't see that.
Well, physicists deal with
Inside of space and time.
these kinds of things. So I mean, you can imagine, if you're a philosopher, you can imagine contemplating something that doesn't involve space, time, and matter. But
no, that's precisely what I'm saying.
Is you can't imagine to explain what that means.
Right. That's precisely what I'm saying. Is that you actually can't imagine that. That it's a linguistic error. Like those words have no meaning for my
syntax. View. It's syntax error. I like that.
Yeah. So existence only makes sense within space and time. that these are features of existence. And so to say outside of that, unless you were implying some other space and time that notions, but that's kind of besides the point. That's maybe a conversation for a different time. Did you want to go into the laws that you were saying that the Big Bang
Yep.
violates?
Yep. So the first law of thermodynamics says that there's no such thing as the creation of energy; it only transfers form. That's a violation of the very first law. It's kind of, if you've ever got a speeding ticket in Oregon, they have something called the VBR, which is a violation of the basic rule. It's like this arbitrary idea that you drove too fast in the snow, whatever. The basic rule is that there's no such thing as the creation of energy; it only transfers forms. That's a problem in your worldview. That's not a problem in my worldview. It's an illogical violation of the laws of physics that everything exists. And I know you have to punt on it. I know I've had so many debates. I've talked to professors, astrophysicists. I'm talking to a physicist now. I know the argument. We don't know. And you think that's okay. And that's fine. So just say, we believe that the universe either always existed or it created itself. And that's your faith. And that's fine. But it's not a logical faith system. It's not a logical belief system because it defies the laws of physics and logic. Explain to me how I'm wrong.
No, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
No, that's the end of that point. I don't want your brother to tell me that I went on too far. You said, and I've got another couple of violations that'll come up here in a second, but just go ahead and help me understand.
Sure. So you said that it violates the first law of thermodynamics. Mm-hmm. David, do you want to address that claim?
There's no violation of the first law of thermodynamics.
And why is that?
Science.
The first law of thermodynamics talks about the transfer of energy, the work and the heat that's done. It's sort of an empirical relationship. The second law of thermodynamics, that's a bad name for it because it's not really a law, and so you shouldn't be treating it as a law. In fact, it can be violated. So you want to understand what's behind that. But
how can it be violated? By energy outside of from another place. And if it's a closed system, energy has to come from somewhere. The only way it can be violated is if energy comes from somewhere, right?
No. The second law of thermodynamics is a statistical law, and given the configuration of matter and energy, I can create a system that obeys the laws. I can make a small system in my room with some billiard balls, and create a situation where the entropy drops. Okay, so so the dropping of the entropy doesn't violate any physical laws, and so we shouldn't think of the second law as a law. It's a most likely configuration for the state of matter and energy. So entropy will almost certainly increase in time, but it doesn't have to. If it doesn't increase in time and it drops, it's surprising, but it's not a violation of any physical laws.
Okay.
Let me just add one thing, that my understanding is that the laws apply to closed systems. And so why would we assume that this would apply to the Big Bang? Like, it's one thing to say something applies about within the universe versus the universe itself, right?
Are you talking to me or your brother? Your brother, right?
Well, technically both, but do you know what I mean by that, David?
Well, I don't think you mean exactly what there's a theorist who surprisingly basically claims the same thing that you've just claimed now, that we can't apply the second law of thermodynamics to the universe as a whole, but I don't. It's not quite the reason that you stated.
Okay, so, can I? Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah,
continue.
Go ahead.
No, because it's going to be a whole thing. Go.
David, is there any other explanation you want to provide as to why there was no violation? Because my understanding is that what matters is that where energy is taken away from one place, it is added to another, right? Am I getting that right?
Can be.
So what I would say is, if there are violations of laws, that's a serious problem. So what you're claiming, if somebody claims that there are violations, you're either claiming that thousands upon thousands of people are clueless, or they're in, they're trying to cheat, they're in bad faith or something, So it's a strange thing to say that theories incorporate laws that are routinely violated. This is not the case.
Yeah. Okay. So, what, you said something about Luke. You said something about. Could you maybe restate why you think the first and second law were violated? Because
Yeah,
I think.
no, I got to address what your brother said. Okay, so what, David? I mean this with all due respect. It's going to come off kind of shitty, and I'm sorry. I'm a firecracker, so whatever. Forgive me. You say I don't understand stuff. Yeah, I don't get the concepts, whatever. You just saw a scientist execute his magic. I want to tell you what David just told you. He can create, with intelligence, he can create a no entropy state on his billiard table. And I would love to know this. I'm guessing it's racking the pool balls. Is that correct?
What I said is that lowering the entropy isn't a violation of the second law.
How are you going to do it on a pool table?
Sorry, lowering the entropy isn't a violation of laws of physics. It's part of the second law, but the second law is really not a law.
Okay, how are you going to reduce the state of entropy on your billiard table?
Make it so, yes, create what colloquially speaking is seen as more order.
Right, so an intelligent mind acting on it with intention can reverse entropy. Perfect. Yep,
No,
that's exactly
no,
what I believe.
No.
Okay,
So
then
that-
let's say the billiard balls rack themselves.
Okay, but that's not what I mean, right? Because the problem is that
That's what you're looking for with the universe. You want the
No.
pool balls to rack themselves.
I want the configuration of matter and energy to evolve according to the laws of physics and to end up in a lower state of entropy. So, but this is a difficult thing to do. It's like saying, when you make your bed, you've created some order, right? But you're not violating the second law of thermodynamics. And so there's some tension there. How do you end up in a lower state of entropy? It's very hard to do. You're not really going to be able to do it. So you can sort of imagine this to happen. And so it can happen, but it's an extremely unlikely state given the distribution of matter and energy in our universe.
Okay, so my claim was I hadn't even really gotten to the second law, which is certainly where I want to go. The question is, how are these violations? The first one I said very clearly, somehow in your biases, you're having a hard time processing that it's true. The very fact that we have matter and energy and it didn't come from anywhere that we know is a violation of the first law. The fact that things have become more organized and we've lost and we've gone to a less entropy driven state is a violation. That's a whole other conversation. I'm glad you guys brought it up. The claim that David is making that it can happen, of course, if you have if you tweak the variables, if you do X, Y, Z, basically a miracle, basically either human intervention or a miracle, it can happen. So you refuse the human intervention, the intelligent invention, so you guys rely on miracles, which is fine, because in my book, I have miracles. And it's like, okay, in your book, you don't have miracles, and I'm telling you, they're both belief systems. So whatever, yeah, you have miracles, I have miracles.
The amount of spinning that I'm witnessing here is like kind of mind-boggling.
Okay, go ahead.
David, again, do you want to address what we just said about the laws again? Before I say
Okay,
something.
so for the first law of thermodynamics deals with matter. Matter exists in the universe. The first law is not responsible for describing the origin of matter. It's a relationship between stuff that exists and the transfer of energy, okay, by work and by heat. It's dealing with things that exist. It's not something designed to describe the origin of matter and energy. So I'm not sure why you criticize it in this way.
Where did the
second law
matter
of
come from?
thermodynamics-
Sorry, continue.
I'm sorry?
Nothing. I'm sorry for interrupting. Continue.
Well, he asked where the matter came from.
But that was rude. Let him finish his point. I'm sorry.
go ahead.
We can ask that later.
No, but fair enough. But what I'm saying to you is that the first law of thermodynamics describes relationships between things that exist. This is true of other branches of physics. It describes configurations of matter and energy, right? So, but then it's unfair to then say the theory doesn't make sense because it doesn't tell you the origin of matter and energy. right? The theory is about something very specific. It's about relationships between matter and energy. So I'm just trying to understand why you're criticizing a theory. Theories aren't all-encompassing things. They're not designed to explain the ultimate nature of reality. So appealing to the first law and expecting it to tell you something that it's not designed to do isn't a fair criticism.
Okay, well, the criticism is basically what is my issue with how does the Big Bang violate the laws of physics? I get what you're saying. It's not the Big Bang. We don't care. It was always here and then it expanded. But my point is, it is not. If you're trying to adhere to Occam's razor, it doesn't make sense that there wasn't matter and there was, and that nothing caused that. Unless you basically want to invoke a miracle, which is a suspension of the laws of physics as we know them, because maybe they didn't exist yet. But then you have a problem. Where do the laws of physics come from? This is why Hoyle was a steady state universe guy. He thought the idea of it all coming into existence was ludicrous. I remember at the beginning of this conversation, I said over time the ludicrousness of it wore down. I'm saying that because of the new data that has come out, I think we need to revisit Hoyle's idea that it is ridiculous and that there's a better idea, including potentially a steady state universe. And I would say I debate a lot of atheists, and the good ones are basically going back to steady state philosophically, because philosophically it actually makes more sense. It's easier to say it was always here. That's fine. Then there was a beginning, but there was no reason for the beginning. So philosophically and scientifically, we're gravitating away from the Big Bang, or at least that from in the creation of the universe. Now we have the very adherent, dogmatic, people that have been kind of pushing this idea for a very long time, and they don't want to change it. But like I said from the beginning, why not change it based on all of the preponderance of evidence or issues that are going against it? And I think the answer would be, and I'll let you answer this, is because the red shift is such a compelling piece of evidence that we're going to discard every other issue and go, hey, red shift, Hubble was right. Sorry, let me say this better. What is okay, we've talked about the issues. I've talked about the issues. You dismiss them, that's fine. But what single piece of evidence or evidences justify in your mind that this system of belief has to be adhered to and can't be questioned or is potentially in trouble? What evidence in favor of it?
Okay, so I don't believe in anything. I'm not a fan of that term, and so the idea that I followed some party line or that scientists in general do this kind of thing, I don't think this is a conversation that we want to have.
It is. It's a conversation I totally want to have. You don't believe the Big Bang happened? You think it's so empirically evidenced that it's just fact? You don't believe it?
So we have to deal with the evidence. I just pointed out some basic evidence that has to do with Hubble's law, because that was sort of the first evidence. And you have to learn to interpret evidence. And if you don't like the interpretation, you have to find a different interpretation that explains that evidence, that data, and all other data. So I would say we're definitely not moving away from the Big Bang. None of the sizes of galaxies that you mentioned has anything to do with the Big Bang. That's just a confusion of sorts. I am with you when you talk about, I don't think you know why that we sort of converge in our thinking on the ideas of why there's something attractive about Hoyle's model, right? Why the steady state model is attractive. I think the idea that to sort of to put high on a pedestal the idea that the past and the future kind of have to be alike. And I think the laws of physics are pointing in that direction. But nonetheless, we have to deal with the evidence. I agree with you that it's a strange kind of thing to posit things suddenly coming into existence. And I would point out to you that there are ways of looking at the Big Bang model in a larger context where you don't have this feature where the past and the future are sort of uniquely and fundamentally different, where they're much more alike. Okay, so I share that concern. The Big Bang is in some sense in conflict, in tension with features of the laws of physics. It's not violating the laws of physics, but it's sort of strange that the universe would be in this sort of very asymmetric state in the way that time is treated. And so there are people who make models where this is not the case, and the Big Bang is not the beginning of everything.
Yeah, that's something that I wanted to say as well, is that I keep hearing this narrative that the Big Bang is talking about origin, or that if it can't account for the beginning of reality, even if there was such a thing, that this is a problem for the Big Bang. The Big Bang never claims to be addressing origin. It claims to be addressing the expansion from of the observable universe from a specific state. And so again, I think that they're. I'm with you, Luke, when you say that we should not be dogmatic about science. We shouldn't be dogmatic about anything, right? But when my understanding is that a lot of the contention that I hear from people on the other side about the Big Bang, about evolution, about abiogenesis, end up all being strawmans. They end up being caricatures of what's actually being said that doesn't actually correspond to the claims, to the data, to the way in which these notions and concepts are understood and expressed.
I think we should.
Part of the problem is that there is this scientific education in I don't know where you're at, but certainly where I live, is really poor. And so when people, there are these very sensationalist articles posted, like, oh, the reality isn't real on a local level. Like they'll have these clickbaity titles. And then people who don't understand what any of those things mean and the way that those stuff is expressed in a way that's confusing end up coming away with the wrong idea.
Right. I think, let me propose an idea for all three of us. If any of us feel like we're kind of going on, because time is limited, I've got to do my live show in a half hour.
Absolutely.
I might run a little bit late, but I think like this, when I used to be in bands, we used to say this kind of thing. You can say, hey, that sucks. Try again. So if somebody's yammering on, I give us all the amnesty to say, okay, I get your point, because a lot of this is like kind of redundant. So I said this earlier in my argument about the difference between academic and kind of scholarly science and pop science, and there can be an issue. And you're both saying kind of what the academic scholarly scientists would need to say intellectually to save any kind of face, is that we don't know where the universe came from. The problem is it's not what's being taught to the masses. And you're saying, oh, pop science and sensational and clickbaity, whatever. I Googled with my Google, where did the universe come from? Because I feel like a lot of people go to Google for information, and they would ask something like, where did the universe come from? And I didn't get a paper that said, well, very complicated, it could not be, it's just rapid expansion. No, I got from the American Museum of Natural History, which was created by racist eugenics, by the way, who were totally pushing pseudoscience back to the Ota Benga days, Madison Grant, Henry Fairfield Osborn, all of these people that were it's literally a temple and a cathedral to secular science, comes up as the first article. Where did the universe come from? Our universe, not we believe, our universe began, it's even got it blue. It's got a blue line. I'm not doing that. That's not my highlight. That'd be me highlighting it. Our universe began with an explosion of space itself, the Big Bang. It doesn't matter the version of that you guys believe in, that you got through your paywall in academia. This is what is taught, okay? What is taught and what the layperson, the masses of people, and this isn't clickbaity, this is the American Natural History Museum in New York City, one of the vaunted cathedrals of natural secular science. Our universe began with an explosion of space itself, the Big Bang. Starting from extremely high density and temperature, space expanded. The universe cooled and simplest elements formed. Gravity gradually drew matter together to form the first stars and the first galaxies. This is what we are taught as our origins. I don't care. It doesn't matter what you actually are thinking, or the deep philosophical ramifications, or what's right and what's wrong. If they would say, we don't know where the universe came from, there's a model called the Big Bang with the expansion of the universe. It doesn't address where the universe came from, but it talks about a rapid expansion. We would be having a different conversation. I have a 7-year-old boy, and if I put him in public education, this is the shit they're going to teach him. It doesn't matter what the actual science is. It doesn't matter the difference between pop science and whatever. This is the narrative. This is what people are taught. The truth of this statement is we have no idea. That what they mean to say, based on your both arguments, where the universe come from, we have no idea. But there was an expansion. The evidence says, and there's issues with this, there's a lot of contradictory evidence, and the new evidence coming every day is making us change our model. No, Our universe began from explosion of space itself. This isn't a straw man. This isn't a red herring. This is the reality of what is taught. This is why I call it a religion. We
David,
don't know.
David, do you want to respond to that before I do?
Well, you're mixing concepts as far as I can see. Yes,
Of course.
the origin of the universe is one thing, and 1,000 years after the Big Bang, what things were like, we can do calculations, and we have observations, so we have specific kinds of observations, right? The 1960s were a crucial time in confirming these ideas. People did observations. So it's a very different thing to talk about the origin of everything at the Big Bang, which scientists will tell you the equations break down, and so we can't actually go there. But after that, associated with expansion, we have things that we can put on solid ground, right? And we have observations about what the universe was like at later times. So that's a completely different thing, and that's on much more solid ground. And so I think you're mixing things. Yes, we don't know at t equals 0 what things were like.
Let me also add on to that, because look, I actually agree with you, what you just said. Your concern about the way in which the science is being taught on the public level is embarrassing, right? I agree with you. I take issue with the same problem that you do. But if we're addressing the theories, then we should be, all of us, what's being, how do I say this? The reality of how these things are expressed in academia is what we should be focused on. The conversation about, if you want to have a conversation about, okay, how do we fix the educational system in my country or yours? I'm not sure. I think, I forget where you.
I'm in the United States, yeah, and you're not going to fix the education system. It's not an accident that it sucks.
Yeah. So if you want to say, if you want to take issue with the way these things are being taught, and saying that it's misleading, or they're making claims that go beyond what the scientists are actually saying, I'm all with you. Like I say the same stuff. It's wrong that we have such a poor education in the sciences in this country.
Yeah, but it's not poor. It's exceedingly effective at what it's designed to do, which is make mindless workers. It's not poor. It's not an accident. This isn't entropy in action, and we just can't figure it out. They need people that don't ask questions and just do the thing and make widgets. But I mean, by design.
I can agree with you on
it's historical fact.
Sure, and I think that part of that is the fault of capitalism. But that's again, that's a separate conversation to have. Mm-hmm. My issue is, I don't see you on your lives talking about, just typing Google, something in Google is not going to get you to a rigorous analysis of the science. So if you were on your live saying, the educational system sucks, this is why what they're saying is wrong, and then actually expressing the science correctly, whether you agree with it or not, you can just end up dismissing the science anyway and having another explanation. We'll get into that another time. Then I would be, regardless of our differences in worldview, I would be supporting you in that endeavor. But what I see you do is something different. What I see you saying, the Big Bang is a fairy tale, evolution is a fairy tale, the abiogenesis is a fairy tale.
Yep. All true. Those are all true. They're all belief systems.
Again, I think using the term belief system, I think is misleading. It seems to me, and again, like you said, you're I know that you've come in this conversation without trying to disrespect anybody, and I hope that you feel we've given you the same respect back.
You have.
I would say that my belief, let's use the term belief, is that you don't understand the science you're criticizing. Okay. And I think that this conversation has shown that. If you want to talk about the way it's like what you just type in Google and you want to be upset about that, I'm upset alongside you. I think that I would agree with you that there's a lot of misinformation on the internet and a lot of misinformation in public schools. That's a separate conversation than you calling the Big Bang Theory a fairy tale and then not be able to a stillman what the theory is actually saying. I know you said you have to go. I don't know how much longer you.
No, what my live goes on at 9 normally. I could probably go as late as 10 because a lot of the people are in here anyway. So I'm just saying, like, we have we're at the beginning, right? We're at the beginning of the book. We haven't gotten very far. So I'm just saying, like, from like in the how much more can we get accomplished? It's good to not get drilled into like redundant arguments about maybe very specific things. That's all I was saying earlier. Okay, so if any of my VOR people are in here, if I've said multiple times that the education system sucks and that that's a major part of the problem and that there was an agenda, etc., please give a peace sign or a
I
yes
believe
or
you said
something.
that. I believe you
Okay.
said that, but the problem is that if in the sentence after you start saying things like the Big Bang is a fairy tale, as opposed to, hey, they're teaching the Big Bang incorrectly in public schools.
Yeah, but it is
Well,
a
then,
fairy tale.
okay, but you haven't demonstrated that.
Okay, so let's go back to that since we're stuck on the Big Bang. Let me define a fairy tale for you. This is fun. We'll go back to Google because somebody asked me the other day, fairy tale definition. This is good stuff because I think it's intentionally clickbaity. And for those of you who aren't familiar with me, I'd like it to be known that my brother Cease here sees my lives. He said, I want to talk to you. He knows me. He knows I'm this is me, right? On my lives. I'm a very passionate guy. I'm very convicted in what I'm not trying to be a sensationalist or overly divisive, etc. But this is who I am. So like it or leave it. When this live's done, you don't have to see it again, but it could be something. Okay. Fairy tale definition: a children's story about magical and imaginary beings and lands. Okay, you can imagine where the universe came from. Yeah, before it was a thing, and then but there wasn't, and we don't know. But it's imagination land. It's literally an imagination. It's a belief system that we tell our children to believe in about faraway lands. Fine, believe it. Don't. People say the Bible's a fairy tale. Look, here's the real trick. We don't know. We have no fucking idea. We don't know where the universe came from. We don't know when it came from. It's all belief systems. It's all belief systems based on our presuppositions. We have data to support. I have data to support the Bible. If we talked about the expanding universe, which is I was trying to get David into confirming that the biggest evidence of the universe is expanding. The Bible says the universe is expanding. So I think that the Big Bang or the expanding universe proves God. Multiple times today, you've said I don't believe, or my claims that I don't understand the science. I can assure you I can understand all of these scientific concepts, and at the very base of it, and I've been debating for a year and a half full time now, it's assumptions, it's interpreting the data to support a worldview. Mine is a belief system. You can call the Bible a fairy tale. You can call whatever we want to say. It's belief systems. And my only issue is that I would never advocate for the Bible to be taught in public school as fact. Where did the universe come from? God of the Bible created it. I would never do that. What I would advocate for is us to say, we don't know particularly. Here's a theory, we don't know. And if I were to do the same thing with where did man come from? The first thing that would come up would be Darwinian evolution. And there's just as many problems with evolution. Actually, the same exact problems. The same exact problems. Where did everything come from? Things get more disorganized over time. That doesn't make logical sense. So if you want to believe it, great. It's not fact. It's not scientific fact. I'm sorry. David he's a physicist, hasn't provided a single bit of scientific evidence. And I want to make that point very clear. He hasn't provided a single shred of scientific evidence in favor of his argument. We're an hour and 40 minutes in. Not one.
David, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, go ahead. Not philosophy, give me science.
I gave you direct evidence. It's Hubble's
What was
law.
that?
So for you to say this is surprising. What I think we should point out is that the Big Bang is simply not a theory about where the universe comes from, and therefore you shouldn't be criticizing the Big Bang based on the fact that it doesn't explain where the universe comes from.
Real quick, David, since could you just real quick since you said that you didn't provide a single one, I mean, I thought I heard several.
Well, it doesn't it doesn't make sense to say that, right? So I say let's focus on a little bit of data. The reason why I do that is because otherwise we just throw a lot of noise out there. So I focused on a little bit of data, right? And I was pretty specific about it. And I said, please interpret this data in a different way. But you agreed with me that it seemed to be supportive of the idea of expansion. So I'm not sure why you're saying now I haven't provided any data whatsoever. I don't understand. There seems to be cognitive dissonance here.
Want to add one other thing as well, that we want to talk about, again, and I'm trying to stay away from the theological discussion, but it keeps kind of sneaking its way back in. is for me we can reinterpret any scripture to try to fit in general enough ways to try to fit the scientific knowledge of the 21st century. It doesn't mean that the Bible predicted anything. To me, these are language games. These are word games that Christians are playing when they're doing that. Just because you call something logical doesn't make it so. From my perspective, theism has no predictive power. It's a story that tries to make sense of the data we already have, and then it makes claims that are completely unfalsifiable. So to call it, the Big Bang isn't a fairy tale. To me, it's much of the religions that would fit the definition of fairy tale.
I just want to point out, Cease,
Yeah,
that
go ahead, Dan.
it's a little strange to me that religious people seem to be so against the Big Bang Theory when religious people were the ones who were the most excited when the Big Bang idea emerged.
Right.
Yeah, Lemaitre. I'm familiar with the Catholic Jesuit who came up with the theory. Okay, so I hate to say it, like I've been kind of rude tonight, and I'm sorry.
No,
I've
you're
debated
fine.
a lot of atheists. There hasn't been a single original thought or thing said to me tonight. You guys can keep saying I don't understand the science. I understand the science. The claim about Hubble's law, I agree the universe is expanding. I said it supports my book. That's literally the only scientific piece of evidence you've given me. What you just said, see, it's the first time I've been frustrated with you tonight. You said the Bible is all post hoc rationality and that somehow theology is like broken. I just wrote down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 predictions the Bible would have made. If you want to call them post hoc, whatever. The Bible said all humans come from one man and one woman. The biologic narrative was called convergent evolution. Man was popping up all over the earth. They would have never thought that we all were related to one man and one woman. Mitochondrial Eve, Y chromosomal Adam. When Rebecca Kahn and Mark Stone figured this out, guess what? The whole scientific establishment threw intellectual rocks at them. This could never be. They hated it. Bible predicted it. Science finally picked up on it. This was in 1984, very recently. The beginning of the universe. And to David's point, there being a beginning does support the biblical narrative. In the beginning,
Sorry,
God
can I
said,
explain one thing real quick? I'm sorry.
mitochondrial
Mitochondrial
Eve.
Eve was a group of humans. It wasn't one
Right.
person.
Yeah, that's what you believe, and we can go into that if you want to. It's literally an person. They say they all just died off. Do me a favor. The reason I'm writing notes as a respectful guest is
Yep.
I want to be able to address these things. Make
Yeah,
any
sure.
notes you want to. We can have 12 debates. Doesn't matter.
Sure.
Okay. The Bible predicted a beginning in the beginning. I think it's very different. I'm a simulation guy. I said that earlier. I would love to give that thought experiment before this game's over. But this debate's over. There's a Freudian slip there. But the idea that there is a beginning defeats the steady state model. And this is why religious people were excited about it. The Bible predicted a beginning. Science didn't teach a beginning for a very long time. The Bible predicted that there would be water underneath the earth, that the floodwaters came from underneath the earth. Now we found vast oceans, more water underneath the earth than above the earth. The Bible predicted that man was made of dirt. Turns out we're made up of the exact same elements. I know Lawrence Krauss and actually Hoyle want to say that we're made of stardust. That's fine. You think dirt come out of stars, whatever. However they got together, that's okay. But the Bible said we'd be made of the same elements made of dirt, and that's what we find out we are once we find out our physiology and actually the chemical composition of human beings. The Bible says that there's catastrophic forms of the earth. Obviously, the Bible talks about this. And so the entire J. Harlan Barrett's fight against uniformitarianism, which said there's not catastrophic formations in geology, it's only uniform, was defeated by a guy who, by the way, guess what? Showed that the Missoula floods were the cause of catastrophic floods. And guess what science did again? Grabbed their bag of intellectual rocks and stoned the guy right out of the room. They held a court case in Washington when they brought the world's leading hydrologists and all of the different leaders of science, and then he absolutely crucified the guy publicly, J. Harlan Barrett. Then he proved them wrong. We have the ways of the water predicted by the Book of Psalms. The guy that read it, the guy's name is Michael Morse. His name's wrong. Michael Murphy. He looked at the book and he went and found the actual oceanic currents. The idea that the Bible only makes post hoc claims is not based on actual evidence. I would say it's an ignorant take based on their bias. You could disagree with me on there, but Every single one of the claims I just and an expanding universe to boot. So say we would decide that later. It's literally what the Bible said. If the Bible said that the floodwaters came only from the sky, we'd have a problem. We find water underneath. If the Bible said that the universe was static, we'd have a problem. If the Bible said that we converged and evolved over, we'd have a problem. None of these are not only not having a problem, they're aging better with time, as true theories do, and are getting more valid by the day.
David, before I say anything, do you want to reply? And I do have to get dinner soon, but
Well, I also have to leave. I just want to make one last point that Luke is actually in agreement with what I said. I pointed out that the evidence we did only talk about a very limited amount of evidence, Hubble's law, and that evidence points to expansion. You agree with that? That's all I care about. So you are interested in data, and that's what I mean by the Big Bang model. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm super interested in data.
David, thank you for coming on. I'll give you a call.
All right, thank you guys.
Thanks for your time, David.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I'm trying to think of how to address what you just said. So this is one of the things where, if you are willing, I would definitely love to talk to you again in the future and maybe go point by point about what you've just said, where predictions, were biblical predictions. I think, Mike, I don't know if you wanted to come on as well. Let me know.
Yeah, bring them on. I see a lot of the chat says I'm lying. I would love to see any specific lies that I just mentioned.
Let me be fair to you, because I don't think that, and again, I have no problem with the way in which you engage. I hope you don't have a problem with the way I engage. I think you're actually being honest, and I think I'm going to give you the same honesty. I don't think you're a liar. I think you're just confused about what the data says. That's what I think.
Better to be confused than a liar.
Right. Yeah. And so what you're calling biblical predictions, I don't think that those things are accurate. I will do more research and to look at the details, and maybe we can have that conversation. I would say that there was nothing about the things that may be true in the Bible that give the supernatural claims of it any credence. I think there are some ways in which the Bible and science are not in conflict, and I think there are ways in which they are. And I do have to get dinner in a couple of minutes, but I don't know if Mike wanted to add anything. But look, are you willing to do this again? I don't know how you feel.
So, what do you guys think? So here's a couple problems with me doing this. And if you remember from the beginning, I kind of asked you, what was the platform going to be? This is going to sound very snobby, and I apologize, but my time is limited. A lot of making content full time is very busy. When I do a live show, it's large. Probably most, a huge chunk of these are my people. I'd have 2 times as many if I was doing a live, and I would do the same thing. So the whole having to come to your live, when we initially agreed to this, it was supposed to be a YouTube thing, and I thought it was going to be like a moderated
Yeah, originally
thing.
we were going to do that. There was an issue. There was a technical issue, which is why we couldn't do it that way. Usually we would have done it that way. I would be happy to do it that way in the future, as opposed to here. And like I said, I would also be happy to do it on your live. We would just have to figure out maybe a little bit ahead of time,
Right.
To try to see how to get my brother on there.
Right, that's what I was going to say is if next time, because I do my live show Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday nights, I'd love to have you on. You're an awesome guy. I love having a discussion with you. You can come on to my live any night. If I see you in there, I'll try and get you in. If your brother's there, we'll try and do it. If you want to bring other experts on, I'd be down to do it. I don't want to commit to this particularly, but I do want to talk more with you. So,
would you also be interested in coming on the YouTube channel once we can get that?
Yeah, I'd be super interested in doing that, especially if we can. I don't mind 2-on-1, 3-on-1. You could let up all the atheists; it wouldn't matter. So that doesn't matter to me. But as far as maybe some sort of semblance of order where there's a moderator and some sort of time constraint or whatever, partially because of my ranting, it's that way it's fair for everybody.
Sure, that's fine. Look, and for me, this wasn't kind of geared to be like a debate. It was more like a conversation. That's why I didn't think of having any particular moderators on. It was more like, let's figure out what is it that we're disagreeing on. Mike, I know, was there anything that you wanted to...
If you want to run, Cease, and me, you can engage with Mike in your chat while you grab your food, you're welcome to do that, or we can do this quickly, whatever's better for you.
Yeah, Mike, I'll stay for a few more minutes before I go. I want to know what Mike wants.
Yeah, that's cool. We can do whatever works for either. How's it going? Yeah, so I'm kind of interested on the fairy tale part that was mentioned. Presumably, when we look at something like a fairy tale versus some type of scientific theory, a property that we could identify that distinguishes those two cases from each other, or creates some type of like asymmetry between the two, is going to be something like novel predictions or predictive expectation.
Right.
And so, from my understanding, when you called the Big Bang a fairy tale, that kind of rubs against, in the wrong way, the prediction of atomic light nuclei or the helium hydrogen ratio that we find, cosmic background microwave radiation, right? And so it seems though that from this view we have actual predictive expectation, but I don't see any predictive expectation on the God hypothesis. Seems that you're going to have to add a bunch of auxiliary hypotheses and make your and give like a lot of bloatware to your hypothesis. So I'm just curious,
I like bloatware.
What kind
That's
of
a good word.
predictions? Yes, like what kind of novel predictions does the God hypothesis make?
Okay, so you got two things there. One of them is more my issues with the scientific narrative, and the other one is what I believe. Do you have a particular order that you would like me to address these? You asked them my issue with the Big Bang, and then the theology. So I can go back to front.
Well,
What do you want
yeah,
to
I mean, it's up to you. I kind of the reason I wanted to list that out was to give you kind of
do? Okay.
the distinguishing factor that I think is relevant when we just kind of use words like fairy tale versus a theory.
Right.
And the
Okay.
distinction that we can point out is that type of novel prediction that's made. And
Perfect.
I'm just
Okay.
wondering, the question I'd like to be answered is, what type of novel predictions does the God hypothesis make?
Okay, so I will answer it in order of the novel predictions claim. I want to add. You said something about atomic light. What was that? Or what was it? Because you talked about the CMBR and you
Oh,
talked about the
it's
deuterium.
atomic. Yeah, the abundance of atomic light nuclei.
Okay, so you're talking about the heavy light element predictive power of the Big Bang, correct?
Yeah, I
Deuterium.
mean, I'm less worried about getting into the
Well, no, it's
nuance
important
there.
because you can't like punch and then run. Okay, so I'm going to
Well, no,
address
it's not
these.
about that. It's just an example of what someone under the model would say is predictive success.
Right.
And
It
so
also
presumably you disagree with that. But the thing that I care about is,
right, and I'll
well,
get to
on
that.
your
But I got
theory,
to make a point because
do you
you
have
make this
predictive
sound like
success?
science won there, and there's issues. It did
No, it's
predict that.
compatible with theism, so I don't see a
Right,
problem there.
right. But it is just like, dude, you can't like it's a jab and run, and I want to address it. It did make novel predictions. It did absolutely. The heavy to light element ratio was exactly what they predicted. I would agree with that. The CMBR was with that. I agree with that. It also didn't predict at all that the expanding universe would accelerate. That was non-prediction. That became a big problem, and the answer to that is dark energy, which they haven't actually figured out. So you have four. A lot of this has to, and this is very hard for us to do because we're trained to think very binary, left, right, believer, not believer. We're very polarized, right, with this juxtaposition of our reality. But unfortunately, the truth a lot of times is more nuanced. So in this scenario, we have novel predictions, yes, and then we have predictions that are antithetical to the novel predictions, including accelerating expansion and also the fully formed galaxies and massive galaxies at what should be the beginning of the beginning of the universe. So you have at the beginning of the Big Bang, you have predictive and incorrect predictions. What would I say there? We don't know. It's a theory. Teach it as a theory. Okay. We can talk more about that if you want to. The God hypothesis. There's a couple issues that I have with this, and one is that I wasn't doing this in any kind of, and what I call myself is a citizen amateur researcher of science. So I'm obviously not qualified, and if I had 10 PhDs, it wouldn't matter if I was talking about this anyways. Ask Jason Lyle, ask Stephen Meyer, ask James Tour. It doesn't matter, Bob Sanford. If you are a creation scientist and you put creation science out, you're immediately blacklisted. So it wouldn't matter if I even had the credentials. Whatever. I might have more reach than a lot of these guys, unfortunately. But I wasn't there to make predictions about what we would find. We've actually made a couple since I've been doing this, and I'm curious to see how they pan out in the next few years. But the most recent prediction in the God hypothesis vein from an actual scientist was Jason Lyle, astrophysicist, who predicted that the James Webb Space Telescope would find fully formed galaxies at 13.5 billion years. Predicted based on the Bible, and it was validated. Nobody heard about it, right? Because it doesn't matter if we predict things. The next thing that was
Well,
predict.
hold on. I can't let you kind of punch and run, right? So let's
Yeah,
start with,
please.
So I'm not understanding, how is that novel prediction for not just like minimal theism, but I mean, we could go with just minimal theism, but presumably it's like, I mean, you just added the Bible, so we're talking about like a triomni God,
Right.
who
Well, yeah, I'll
presumably you
explain it.
believe in a Trinity and all this other kind of stuff in there. How is that? Um, how is that a prediction by the
Because
Bible? It doesn't. It's
based
just kind of.
on the Genesis reading of the beginning of the universe, there is no Big Bang. Everything was made in a mature state, in the state that it is right now, and much younger than was that's predicted by the Big Bang model. So
Yeah,
Jason
but that
Weil,
seems underdetermined by other theological considerations that you don't believe in, right? Like
are we
presumably that's gonna be
what?
underdetermined by Hinduism or some other types of religion. So this isn't
What
a
does that
novel
matter?
prediction.
I don't think Hinduism is right. What does
Well,
that matter? I'm talking about my worldview.
your hypothesis is underdetermined, right? And you need a novel prediction to separate your hypothesis being a Christian hypothesis, right? The Christian God, as opposed to this other type of one. I don't even grant that this is getting anywhere towards a God, any minimal theism, but you have a problem on your hand, right? Your theory is completely underdetermined. I mean,
So
you're
wait,
just.
in your parameters, I have to come up with some sort of
Do you know what
pantheist
the
one
problem of
size fits all
underdetermination? Do you know what the problem of underdetermination is?
that I'm not specifically defining what was predicted by my belief system. I'm guessing.
No,
No, the problem of
no.
underdetermination is going to be that it's going to be consistent with two hypotheses, right? And so you're going to want to actually make some novel predictions that can't be predictive expectations on the other hypotheses, right?
Like Hinduism?
Yeah, this isn't a
Holy
prediction for
shit.
Christian
That's the most,
theism.
that's like maybe the worst
And
argument I've
one, I'm
ever
not even
heard.
going to grant that this doesn't even seem like I wouldn't even grant minimal theism. Like how is this predictive
Oh,
expectation for an
you guys
entity
are
with
terrible.
intention?
I gotta
Up
talk.
to, yeah,
This
go
is
ahead. Go
no,
ahead.
because that's not gonna go well with J Mike. I can tell.
Yeah.
He's
Well, I'm
he's
just asking, how does this get to intentional states of an agent that created the universe? I'm not seeing it. I don't get it.
You said specifically what kind of predictive powers or that we talk about related to my God hypothesis, and I gave a very specific recent scientific prediction based on the holy book that I subscribe to, and you're dismissing it as what about the Hindus and blah blah. What? That's a terrible
You're
argument. You
giving a
asked for a question, I gave you
hypothesis,
an answer.
and your hypothesis is underdetermined by other people that don't agree with you. But
Well, that
one,
doesn't matter.
I'm
I
not
think
even
that
going to
they're
grant
wrong.
that. Great, but let's just take a step back. How does this even, let's just say minimal theism, how does this, without the baggage, right? How does this predict anything about intentional states of an agent that has desires and the ability to produce its outcome? I don't get it.
Okay, so I guess since you're just making this up as you go based on your parameters, what argument do I need to accommodate here? What is it? Pantheism, all theism, any god, and all gods, deism? What are we
Novel,
talking about?
novel predictions.
By what who's making the novel prediction in the
You
world?
are presumably the God hypothesis we can raise the probability that it's true or that the proposition God exists is true, right? And presumably what you can do, right, is
Does
have
this
novel
impress
predictions.
people when you say this thing? Is this like, are you impressing yourself with
I'm
this
not really
argument?
worried about the meta, right? If you want to focus on the content, I'm happy to
Wow.
continue. If you want to
Okay.
focus on the meta and embarrass yourself, I'm happy to do
Oh,
that as well.
Oh yeah, no,
this
no,
is
we
fine.
can go,
This is
dude. I'd
fine.
love to have you embarrass me. So go meta.
This is
Okay, it
fine.
doesn't matter.
Let's keep
Okay,
it. Let's try to keep it simple.
I just
Yeah, well, yeah, so are you going to answer, do you have novel predictions, or
okay.
did I just successfully show that you don't have novel
No, so
predictions?
now that I'm understanding that it's not specific to my belief system or the book I believe in, and it's actually some sort of ambiguous theologic, predictive, scientific thing, let me let the cat out of the bag here. I've never said that God exists in any kind of proven way. We have support to believe it. We have evidence to support this belief, but I've never said there's proof of God. So the
So
whole
your
art,
theory doesn't make novel predictions. So you're
uh,
conceding.
it can make we can make a hypothetical kind of a philosophic thought experiment prediction, but no, God by definition is outside of this space and time reality, and you're not going to prove God exists. This reality isn't based on the evidence for God that we have to find and see, and then I go, look, hey, there's God. It's not. This isn't how this reality is designed. Anybody would think that's the case is not
Yeah,
hasn't
this
done the
just sounds
research.
like a construction of a just so story, and I don't find just so stories to be very interesting. So
Oh,
unless you have novel predictions, I think I'm satisfied with the conversation.
okay.
So
I'm gonna.
wait,
I'm gonna
no,
just
okay, go
go
ahead, Cease.
here. You can say what you want to say, Luke, and then I'm gonna make a closing statement before I have to go.
I
But
just want to be clear that I'm understanding J Mike's thing. I need to provide a scientific predictive whatever theory that fits all religious systems, some sort of ambiguous, arbitrary book system or no book system, or just the general concept of God having been predicted before I guess I existed because I've only been here for 45 years. Do I am I understanding correctly? And if I don't, I lose or something?
Well, no, what's going to happen now is that you don't have a theoretical virtue of unification where you can take phenomena and data and you can unify those observations of those data or the predictive success of theories, unify them, and that's virtuous in your theory. You want that, right? It's not a vice, it's a good thing. But the thing that you have, right, you wouldn't have any type of unification. It would be something known as spurious unification. You wouldn't actually have any novel predictions, and it sounds like what you're doing, right, is conceding that this hypothesis, in fact, doesn't make testable or novel predictions, and that's I'm perfectly happy to say that just on the abductive case, it seems like we have a better reasons to accept naturalism because it's a simpler theory that could potentially not have this vice of not making novel predictions. But on the other side, you can't constitute evidence if you're not making novel predictions because you don't have independent motivation for why your theory is true. You just have a just so story.
Okay,
I can make
so
just so stories too.
that's fine. No, Cease, I need to talk for a second. So
Yeah,
we got
go
a
ahead,
couple
and then I
options
want to say
here.
something.
Thank you for the galaxy.
One option is that I give you my best logical framework in which my belief system has validity, and the other one is that I ask you what your novel predictions were about how the universe began to be. Which would you like? Because you said the natural order is better because obviously you have the answers. So I would like to
I didn't
hear
say
your.
I never said I had the answers. I just said if under presumably a naturalist, just comparing to a
Yeah, but you said
naturalist
the
view,
naturalist version was
or maybe even a
more
non-naturalist.
acceptable. Well, you said the natural one, there's more evidence for it, and so I would like a
Well, I didn't
predictive.
say evidence. I just said it's theoretically more virtuous, right? Because it's going to have unification of theories, or it's going to make novel predictions, and you've removed that, right? So when we just compare at this moment, you're committing errors, at least what I would say, errors in having virtues in your theory, because you don't have the things that are going to separate. Right? Remember the underdetermination issue I had. If you make novel predictions, then you don't have to worry about your hypothesis being compatible with the Hindu hypothesis, right? Because you make novel predictions that shows predictive success or predictive expectation that isn't expected on their hypothesis, but it's expected on your hypothesis. And that's what that does is it doesn't prove anything, but it raises the probability of your theory being more correct. And that's, by the way, what we do with the Big Bang. We've made these predictions, and that's what maybe the steady state model is true, but we need some predictions for that, right? That's how this works.
Okay, so I want to be very clear that the Hindu religious system, I believe entirely, and this is no offense to the Hindi people, lovely people, Islam, lovely people. This isn't a who's right, who's wrong from a standpoint of I feel like I'm in any kind of better state, but because of how my belief system works, their beliefs have zero bearing on my beliefs. By the definition of the belief system that I'm in, it's a monotheistic system, and all of those other stories are either whatever, not incompatible, we'd say in the nicest way. So us trying to find some sort of framework where they have a million gods and 12-armed blue-armed gods and they worship cows, and the one where I have a monotheist one creator who spoke this existence into being outside of the space-time, they're not compatible. So I don't personally, the idea that we have to find some sort of parsimonious explanation to fit in their worldview is it would be like me telling you, well, if you're going to believe in the Big Bang, you're going to also have to explain how the universe isn't locally real, or 3 or 4 other things, and say, okay, go. I don't think that there's a
That's not
bearing.
what it's saying. That's not what it's
Well,
saying.
it's not. Yeah, it's really not what I'm saying. But
Okay.
look, I just want to be at least clean and concise before Cease has to go. So it is the case that you don't have any novel predictions, or that this God hypothesis doesn't make novel predictions. Am I right about that?
No,
I
I
just want to be
specifically
clean.
gave you a novel prediction very recently that you immediately dismissed because it wasn't
That
compatible with the
wasn't a
Hindi
novel
system.
prediction at all. That's again, that was underdetermined. I've already gone over this, right? It's underdetermined by other hypotheses that are consistent. And one, it's not even clear to me that's even not compatible with some naturalist type of theory. It doesn't seem that it's explicitly saying this predictive expectation is what you would find if and only if there's an entity with intentional states that desires an outcome and loves its creatures, right? There's nothing there.
Then what
You're
is?
just saying this.
Can you give me an example of what this predictive,
I don't know. It's not. Look, I don't look. This
Well,
is the
I think he's
problem with the
asking for
God.
the
I can
scientific
tell you. I
method.
can tell you. It's not my job, but two, here's a problem that I'll just raise to you. Your hypothesis to me seems to consist that you look at something in the world, like some fact, and you say, well, what best explains this? And that's a good thing to do. That's what we should do. But this is the problem, at least from my view. If you have an entity that desires that outcome, has the ability to produce that outcome, and doesn't have countervailing reasons not to produce that outcome, I can explain any data I want, right? Anything I want, I can construct and say, oh, well, I had good days on Monday for 4 weeks in a row. Well, what best explains that? Okay, well, there's an entity that desires me to have good Mondays. It has the ability to give me good Mondays, and it has no countervailing reasons not to produce Monday. Voila, the next Monday, that's evidence for good day fairies that want to bless me on Monday. But why are we adding these intentional states or desires to it? That just seems to explain anything, and it doesn't seem like an interesting hypothesis because it can explain anything you want it to explain. I don't find that to be interesting.
So,
right? Well, that's
look,
interesting. Is
respond.
fair. Go ahead.
Do you want to respond, and then I'm gonna say something, and then I'm gonna have to end this.
I would like to give, just as quickly as I can, my logical explanation for just how we see reality working. The idea of a deity being responsible makes more sense than it having created itself. It'll take me about 3 minutes. I'll go as quickly as I can. I use the analogy quite a bit of Minecraft or Mario, whatever. And Mario, we'll do Mario. Mario and Luigi, they're getting the coins, they're getting the mushrooms, they're saving the princess. And one day Mario has his existential crisis, and he says, "Hey Luigi, what are we doing here? What are we doing?" And Luigi starts, "I don't know, Mario. We get here," and they start looking at this, and they start trying to think of what they're doing here, and they start coming with the natural, oh, the rocks did this, and the things did this, whatever. The reality of the situation for Mario and Luigi is if they forfeit the idea that an intelligent mind outside of their reality, we would all agree that Shigeru Miyamoto, who's in Japan on the Earth, isn't in the Nintendo. We would all agree that. So if Mario and Luigi say, I don't see the proof of Shigeru, I don't do it. So they just say, he's not there. That's fine, but it's not a logical deduction. The reality is there's a Japanese human being, which they couldn't possibly understand. They're 8-bit side-scrolling, one-dimensional entities inside of a 8-bit first edition Nintendo that's designed by computer software, computer engineers, the mind of Shigeki Matsuyama that connected to the power grid, etc. If they they couldn't even conceive of this Japanese individual who breathes air and drinks water and eats food and has a wife or whatever, and he goes to the ocean and is flying on a rock through the universe. They could never understand that. And so Mike has this argument: give me this predictive power or whatever, so I win. There's no God. Well, in this scenario where Mario and Luigi say that is an invalid possibility, there is no way, they're never going to get the right answer. And of all of from our perspectives, to say, hey, there could be a designer with the kind of resources necessary in the mind to create this reality would be A, more logical, B, correct, and omitting that means you're always going to get the wrong answer, which is what I see with nobody knows where the universe came from. Nobody knows where information came from. Everything defies the laws of physics. It's fine. You want to believe it's a natural order. Mike said a natural explanation is sufficient, is superior to an entity outside of this universe creating it. That's fine. But it's not consistent with the law. The first law of thermodynamics, which says that something creates something, nothing just creates itself. So the presuppositional argument or the make the predictive powers, whatever, there is predictive powers in the Bible. Some have been right, some have been wrong. I'm very clear that mine's a belief system, and my whole point is that so is the secular version. And in my belief system, the one that I'm talking about is more congruent with logic and the laws of physics and just kind of how we understand reality to work. We don't see things vamp into existence, and we don't see things get better over time. We see the worst. We see the reverse of that. So, anyways, that's my final point. If anybody wants to
Sure, yeah.
that.
Well, I'll just close out a statement to it. I appreciate your time, by the way, and when I butted in, I appreciated you listening and then responding. So I want to extend that. Yeah, I mean, to me, it just seems at least clear to me. At least I'll go backwards. The Mario kind of example. At least in that analog, it seems that Mario and Luigi wouldn't have justification for that concept, or for thinking that it wasn't maybe the developers of GoldenEye outside the game, right? Or no developer or whatever at all. And if that's the case, then they don't have justification or reason to accept it. So they can't have a justified true belief if that's what we're taking knowledge to be. And so they couldn't actually have knowledge. And so there isn't a reason, nor would there be novel predictions that they could make. That's not to say, therefore, it doesn't exist. That's just to say you can't have justification or knowledge. And I'm happy for that concession to be made, because then it's just the case that the theist doesn't have any justification for the proposition God exists. And that's what I'm trying to get across. So then the last kind of thing I would say is that it seemed that my interlocutor conceded that there are no novel predictions in the theory, and that it unnecessarily commits an issue on ontological economy, where now it's less economical, and he just unnecessarily postulates an entity that is an idle wheel that has no explanatory advantage to the theory, and so we should shave that thing off because it's not doing anything. And that's where I would close.
I just want to say, and this I guess will be my closing statement. Well, first of all, Luke, I appreciate your time for you to come on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I try to, stay out of different things as much as I could, so it wouldn't feel like we're, being ganged up on.
I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I didn't feel that way at all.
Okay, great. I will say this, that from my perspective, there's nothing more logical about belief in God in comparison to other possibilities. Nobody in here, my brother included, is claiming that God can't exist or that we know God doesn't exist. Nobody's making absolute claims of any sort in this conversation as far as the question of God's existence. The issue here is, what are we justified to believe in? What is a novel prediction? And in the context of science, are the critics of science understanding what the scientists and what the theories are actually suggesting? And so I would say that from my experience in engaging in these conversations, the answer, unfortunately, to that question is often no. When you said, that you weren't trying to be disrespectful, but that you feel like you haven't heard anything new, I believe you. I don't think you were trying to be disrespectful at all, and I don't take any disrespect from that statement. I would say the same thing when it comes to my conversations with theists, is I haven't heard anything that I haven't heard 1,000 times before, which is, I have no problem acknowledging the gaps in science, limitations in science, perhaps even in principle, there may be things science can't explain. Nowhere in that gap is saying God did it a reasonable statement to make. And it's a false dichotomy to say it's either God created everything, like God himself didn't need to be created, or the universe created itself.
No, it's not.
Well, I'm not saying maybe you did. Maybe I misheard you. I know that.
No, I didn't give the whole where did God come from thing is actually a really logical argument. But you said that it's where did God come from doesn't make any sense, and I'm just disagreeing with that because there's actually an explanation. But anyways,
I would say this, that those are not the only options.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that there are ways to talk about, and again, I will also say like this: that there's nothing about our lack or gaps in knowledge that is a gotcha moment for the atheist, like or for the theist versus the atheist, where it's like, oh, well, you can't answer the beginning of the universe. I have an answer. It's God. I'm more logical. That to me is ridiculous. I'm perfectly fine with saying I don't know. I think, in fact, many times it is the intellectually honest position to take that I don't know. It doesn't bring credence to theism as succeeding where other fields may be failing. And like I said, if you are willing to engage again in the future, whether it's on the YouTube channel, whether it's on your live, whatever, I will be happy to do that.
Yep.
I appreciate your time for coming on here. And I appreciate everybody that's listening in the audience, and I hope that you all got something out of it. So thanks, everybody, and
yep.
I'll see you guys next
God bless you guys. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.